Admiral Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crystal Dawn. His forearms moved across the control panels with practiced ease. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as his crew monitored the vast emptiness of space around them. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving an unknown energy signature from the Kepler Nebula." Zethkar's large dark eyes focused on the main display. The Kepler Nebula was restricted space. No one was supposed to be there. The Council had marked it as a dead zone after the last inhabitable planets were stripped of resources 300 years ago. "Show me," he commanded. The main screen flickered and displayed a three-dimensional map of the nebula. A red dot pulsed near the outer edge, close to what used to be a mining system. The energy readings were strange. They showed fusion technology, but the power output was massive. "Analysis?" Zethkar asked his science officer. "The readings are confusing, Admiral. The technology appears primitive. Basic fusion reactors, simple shield generators. But the size..." The science officer paused, checking his instruments again. "Sir, whatever is out there is very large." Zethkar felt a flutter of interest. His patrol fleet had been cruising this sector for months without finding anything exciting. Pirates avoided this area because there was nothing worth stealing. Trade ships used faster routes through safer space. "How large?" he asked. "Difficult to say from this distance. The nebula interferes with our long-range scanners, but based on the energy output, it could be 20 times the size of our largest vessels." The other officers on the bridge looked at each other with confusion. 20 times larger than a council ship meant something truly massive. But primitive technology made no sense. How could a species build something so large without advanced materials and construction techniques? "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "should we alert the council? Unknown vessels in restricted space require immediate reporting." Zethkar considered this. Standard protocol demanded he contact the council immediately, but standard protocol also meant waiting for orders, which could take weeks. By then, whatever was in the nebula might be gone. Not yet, he decided. "We will investigate first. If it is just a lost colony ship or some merchant vessel with broken navigation, we can handle it ourselves." His fleet consisted of 12 ships. Each one was a masterpiece of council engineering. Their hulls were made from crystalline materials stronger than any metal. Their weapons could crack asteroids. Their shields could deflect the radiation from a dying star. "Set course for the nebula," Zethkar ordered. "Battle formation. Shields up but weapons powered down. We do not want to appear threatening to what might be refugees." The Crystal Dawn led the formation toward the nebula. The other 11 ships followed in a precise pattern that had been perfected over centuries of space combat. Each ship knew its position and role. As they traveled, Zethkar thought about the possibilities. Maybe it was a generation ship from some forgotten colony. Sometimes isolated human or alien settlements developed strange technology. They might have built one enormous vessel instead of a proper fleet. Or perhaps it was a mining operation. Some corporate entity might have decided the old Kepler system still had resources worth extracting. They could be using primitive but cheap technology to process asteroids. The worst possibility was that it might be some kind of weapon. A doomsday device built by terrorists or extremists, but Zethkar dismissed this idea quickly. No terrorist group had the resources to build something 20 times larger than a council ship. "Admiral," the navigation officer announced, "we are approaching the nebula's edge. Visual contact in 30 minutes. Reduce speed to half," Zethkar commanded. "Begin active scanning. I want to know everything about that vessel before we make contact." The minutes passed slowly. The crew worked quietly at their stations, gathering data and preparing reports. Zethkar felt the familiar excitement of a new encounter. In his 40 years of service, he had made first contact with 17 different species. Most had been peaceful meetings that ended with new trade agreements or defense pacts. "Visual contact established," the sensor officer reported. The main screen changed to show the view ahead. Through the swirling colors of the nebula, something enormous came into view. At first it looked like a small asteroid. Then the sensors adjusted the scale and everyone on the bridge fell silent. The ship was massive beyond anything they had ever seen. Its hull was gray metal covered with strange markings and symbols. Hundreds of structures jutted from its surface. Some looked like weapons. Others might have been communication arrays or sensor equipment. "By the void," someone whispered. Zethkar stared at the image. The vessel was not just large, it was a floating city. Its surface was covered with what looked like cities and industrial complexes. Lights twinkled across its hull like stars. Size estimate? He asked quietly. 27 kilometers long, 8 kilometers wide, mass. The sensor officer checked his readings twice. Mass is approximately 2 billion tons. The bridge fell silent again. Even the largest council dreadnoughts were only 2 kilometers long. This thing was more than 10 times longer and hundreds of times more massive. What are they doing? Zethkar asked. They appear to be mining the asteroid belt. Small ships are moving between the asteroids and the main vessel. They are collecting raw materials. Zethkar studied the tactical display. The small ships were each the size of council frigates. There were dozens of them moving with organized efficiency. This was not some desperate refugee operation. This was an industrial fleet conducting systematic resource extraction, sir, the communications officer said. Should we attempt contact? Zethkar nodded slowly. Protocol demanded that he identify himself and determine if these beings had permission to be in council space. The fact that they clearly did not have permission was beside the point. First contact had to be handled carefully. Open a channel. Standard greeting protocols. The communications officer activated the main transmitter. Unknown vessel. This is Admiral Zethkar of the Galactic Council Defense Fleet. You are in restricted council space. Identify yourself and state your purpose. They waited. The massive ship continued its mining operations as if the council fleet did not exist. Small ships moved back and forth carrying loads of processed materials. Try again, Zethkar ordered. Use the universal translator. Include all major galactic languages. The message was broadcast again in over 400 different languages. This time there was a response. This is Captain Sarah Chen of the UHSV Prometheus. You are interfering with legal salvage operations in unclaimed space. State your intentions. The voice was female and spoke with calm authority. The translation matrix identified the language as previously unknown, but was able to provide a real-time translation. Zethkar felt a moment of amusement. This Captain Chen spoke as if her primitive vessel posed some kind of threat to the council fleet. Her ship might be large, but it was clearly built with inferior technology. Captain Chen, he replied, this system has been claimed by the Galactic Council for over 300 years. You are in violation of council space. Prepare to be boarded for inspection. The response came quickly. Admiral, our records show no claim on this system. We are conducting legal salvage under the Terran Colonial Charter. We request that you withdraw immediately. Terran Colonial Charter? Zethkar had never heard of any Terran government. But that was not unusual. New colonies and governments appeared regularly in the Outer Rim territories. Captain Chen, he said firmly, the Galactic Council does not recognize any Terran authority. You will prepare for boarding or face the consequences. There was a long pause. When Captain Chen spoke again, her voice was still calm but somehow different. Admiral Zethkar, I strongly advise you to reconsider your position. The UHSV Prometheus is prepared to defend itself if necessary. Zethkar almost laughed. This human captain actually thought her oversized mining vessel could threaten a council battle fleet. It was time to show her the reality of the situation. Admiral Zethkar activated his ship's external displays. The Crystal Dawn and the 11 other vessels in his fleet lit up with brilliant lights. Each ship's hull began to glow with the characteristic blue radiance of charged particle shields. Weapon ports opened along their crystalline surfaces. This is your final warning, Captain Chen, Zethkar broadcast. Surrender immediately or we will take your vessel by force. On the main screen, the enormous human ship continued its mining operations. The small vessels moving between the asteroids did not change course or speed. It was as if the entire council fleet was invisible to them. No response, Admiral, his communications officer reported. Sir, the tactical officer said, studying his instruments, I am detecting some unusual readings from the human vessel. What kind of readings? Power fluctuations. Very large ones. Their reactor output just increased by 300%. Zethkar frowned. Why would a mining ship increase power when facing a military fleet? Unless they were trying to escape. Their primitive engines probably needed enormous amounts of energy to move something that massive. Prepare to disable their engines, he ordered. Target their main propulsion systems. Minimum force. Sir, the sensor officer interrupted. I am getting more detailed scans now that we are closer. The readings are confusing. Explain. The human ship shows primitive technology as we thought. Basic fusion reactors, simple materials, crude construction techniques. But Admiral, there are thousands of individual systems. Maybe tens of thousands. What do you mean? Weapon systems, Admiral. I am counting weapon emplacements all across the hull. Point defense arrays, missile tubes, energy weapon mounts. There are more weapons on that single ship than our entire fleet carries combined. Zethkar felt a cold sensation in his stomach. That cannot be accurate. Check your instruments. I have checked 3 times, sir. The human vessel appears to be armed beyond anything in our databases. This changed things. A mining ship with a few defensive weapons was one thing. But if these readings were accurate, the humans had built some kind of mobile fortress. How many weapons exactly? Zethkar asked. I count over 800 individual weapon systems, sir. And that is only what I can see from this angle. The bridge fell silent. 800 weapons on a single ship was impossible. The largest Council dreadnought carried perhaps 40 weapons. This human vessel would need thousands of crew members just to operate that much firepower. Admiral, the communications officer said, the humans are transmitting again. Captain Chen's voice filled the bridge. Admiral Zethkar, this is your final warning. Withdraw from this system immediately. We will not ask again. The calm authority in her voice was no longer amusing. If the sensor readings were accurate, this human captain had the firepower to back up her words. Captain Chen? Zethkar replied carefully. Perhaps we can discuss this situation. The Council is always interested in diplomatic solutions. There is nothing to discuss. You entered our operation area with weapons charged and made threats. Under human military law, that constitutes an act of aggression. Human military law has no authority here, Zethkar said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. It has authority over human vessels and human operations. You are interfering with both. Zethkar looked around his bridge. His officers were studying their instruments with worried expressions. The tactical display showed their 12 ships arranged in perfect formation around the single massive human vessel. It should have been an overwhelming show of force. Instead, it felt like they were surrounding a sleeping giant. Sir, the science officer said quietly, I am detecting something else. The human ship is not alone. What do you mean? There are other energy signatures in the asteroid belt, hidden among the larger rocks. I think there are more ships. Zethkar felt his confidence crumble completely. How many more ships? At least 3 with similar energy signatures to the main vessel. Possibly dozens of smaller ones. The Admiral stared at the tactical display. They had stumbled onto an entire human fleet. And if each of the large ships carried as many weapons as the first one, Admiral, his tactical officer reported, the human vessel is changing configuration. Weapon ports are opening across the entire hull. On the main screen, the massive human ship began to transform. Sections of hull plating slid aside to reveal row after row of weapon emplacements. The surface that had looked industrial now revealed itself to be a carefully designed war machine. Energy readings are spiking, the sensor officer announced. They are charging their weapons. How many weapons are now visible? Zethkar asked. Over 2,000, sir, and more sections are still opening. 2,000 weapons. Zethkar tried to imagine what kind of species built ships with 2,000 weapons. The human approach to warfare was completely different from anything the Council had encountered. Captain Chen, he broadcast quickly, there seems to be some misunderstanding. The Council fleet is willing to withdraw while we discuss this situation through proper diplomatic channels. Admiral, you threatened to take my ship by force. In human space, that would be considered an act of war. However, I am authorized to accept your surrender. Surrender? Zethkar had never heard such a word directed at a Council fleet. The idea was so foreign that it took him a moment to understand what she had said. Captain, I think you misunderstand the situation, he replied. This is a Council defense fleet. We do not surrender to mining vessels. Admiral, the UHSV Prometheus is not a mining vessel. It is a Titan-class warship of the United Human Space Navy. The mining operation is a secondary mission. A warship. The massive vessel was not some civilian mining ship with defensive weapons. It was a dedicated military vessel designed for war, and if human military doctrine called for ships with thousands of weapons, Sir, the tactical officer whispered, all human weapons are now fully charged. Energy readings are off the scale. Zethkar realized that his perfect formation had become a trap. His 12 ships were arranged in a circle around a vessel that could probably destroy all of them in minutes. The humans had allowed them to approach, had listened to their demands and had prepared for battle while appearing to negotiate. "Captain Chen," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What are your intentions?" "That depends on yours, Admiral. Are you prepared to withdraw from this system?" Zethakar looked around his bridge. His officers were waiting for orders. The tactical display showed that the human ship could target all 12 Council vessels simultaneously. If this Captain Chen decided to attack, the Council fleet would not survive. But withdrawal meant admitting that a single human ship had forced an entire Council fleet to retreat. The political consequences would be enormous. His career would be over. The Council's reputation for military superiority would be damaged. "Captain," he said finally, "the Council requires proof of your legal authority to operate in this system." "Admiral, you are stalling. I have given you multiple opportunities to withdraw peacefully. Do you intend to leave, or do we have a problem?" The question hung in the air. Zethkar knew that his next words would determine whether this ended in diplomacy or disaster. The human captain had shown remarkable patience, but her tone suggested that patience was running out. On the main screen, the enormous human warship waited. Its thousands of weapons were charged and ready. In the asteroid belt around them, more human ships remained hidden but certainly prepared. Zethkar had commanded fleets for 20 years. He had won battles against pirates, rebels, and hostile aliens. But he had never faced anything like this. The humans had built ships that turned warfare into something completely different. "Admiral," Captain Chen's voice came again, "I am waiting for your answer." Admiral Zethkar was about to respond when his youngest tactical officer, Ensign Korth, made a critical mistake. The young officer, nervous and eager to prove himself, misinterpreted the Admiral's hesitation as an order to fire. A single particle beam lanced out from the crystal dawn, striking the human ship's forward shields. The beam was meant as a warning shot, fired across the bow of the massive vessel. It was a standard intimidation technique that had worked on dozens of other species. The beam hit the human ship's shields and disappeared without any visible effect. The enormous vessel did not even slow down in its mining operations. "Ensign," Zethkar shouted, "who gave you permission to fire?" "Sir, I thought," Korth began, but Captain Chen's voice cut through the bridge communications. "Admiral Zethkar, your vessel has just fired upon a United Human Space Navy ship. This constitutes an act of war under the Terra Colonial Charter. You have 30 seconds to stand down all weapons, or we will respond with appropriate force." Zethkar felt panic rising in his chest. "Captain Chen, that was a warning shot. We are not at war. My officer acted without orders. Admiral, your intentions are irrelevant. You fired on my ship. Under human military law, I am now authorized to use lethal force in self-defense." The main screen suddenly filled with light. Every weapon on the human ship's visible surface fired at once. Hundreds of particle beams, energy pulses, and missile streams erupted from the Titan-class warship. The Council fleet's formation disintegrated in seconds. 3 ships were hit directly and lost power immediately. Their shields collapsed and their hulls cracked open like eggs. 2 more ships suffered critical damage and began spinning out of control. "Evasive maneuvers," Zethkar screamed. "All ships, evasive maneuvers." But there was nowhere to run. The human weapons had incredible range and accuracy. Every shot found its target. The remaining Council ships scattered in all directions, but the human gunners tracked them easily. "Sir," the tactical officer reported, "the human weapons are not trying to destroy us. They are targeting our engines and weapon systems." Zethkar realized the human captain was showing mercy. With that much firepower, she could have vaporized the entire Council fleet in the opening salvo. Instead, she was crippling their ships while keeping the crews alive. "Admiral," Captain Chen's voice came through the communications, "order your remaining ships to power down all weapons and prepare to be boarded." "Captain Chen, please. We can resolve this diplomatically. The time for diplomacy ended when you opened fire. Power down your weapons or I will disable the rest of your fleet." Zethkar looked around his bridge. 5 of his 12 ships were already crippled. The remaining 7 were trying to escape, but human weapons were tracking them with perfect accuracy. Every few seconds, another Council ship would lose its engines or weapons. "Sir," the sensor officer reported, his voice shaking, "I am detecting massive energy buildups throughout the asteroid field. The other human ships are powering up." On the main screen, sections of asteroid began to move. What had looked like rocks were actually camouflaged ships. 3 more vessels similar in size to the Prometheus emerged from hiding places among the larger asteroids. Each one was just as massive as the first ship. Each one had thousands of weapon emplacements, and each one was now targeting the fleeing Council vessels. "How many ships do they have?" Zethkar whispered. "I count 4 large vessels and at least 30 smaller ones," the sensor officer replied. "Sir, the smaller ones are each the size of our heavy cruisers. 30 smaller ships that were each as large as a Council heavy cruiser. 4 massive warships that could probably destroy planets." The humans had not sent a mining expedition protected by a single warship. They had deployed an entire battle fleet. "Admiral," Captain Chen broadcast, "this is your final warning. Order all remaining ships to power down or I will be forced to disable them." Zethkar watched his tactical display. 2 more of his ships had lost power and were drifting helplessly. The remaining 5 were still trying to escape, but human ships were moving to intercept them. The humans were not just overwhelming them with superior firepower. They were demonstrating tactical coordination that matched their technological advantage. Every move the Council ships made was anticipated and countered. "Sir," his communications officer said, "Captain Thekmore of the Starspear is requesting permission to surrender." Surrender. The word that no Council officer had ever expected to use against a primitive species. "Admiral Zethkar," Captain Chen continued, "your ships are outgunned and outnumbered. I have no desire to cause unnecessary casualties. Order them to stand down." Zethkar realized he had no choice. His fleet was scattered and crippled. The humans could destroy every ship at their leisure. The only reason his crews were still alive was because the human captain was choosing to spare them. "All Council vessels," he broadcast on the fleet frequency. "This is Admiral Zethkar. Power down all weapons and prepare to be boarded. Do not resist." One by one, his remaining ships began to comply. Their weapons powered down and their shields dropped. The proud Council fleet that had entered the system with such confidence was now completely at the mercy of the human forces. "Thank you, Admiral," Captain Chen said. "Human boarding parties will inspect your vessels to ensure compliance with the ceasefire. Any attempt to rearm or escape will be met with immediate destruction." Small human ships began approaching the crippled Council vessels. Each boarding craft was the size of a Council fighter but appeared to be heavily armored and armed. "Admiral," the sensor officer reported, "I am getting detailed scans of the human weapons now." "Sir, some of these systems are completely unknown to our databases." "What do you mean?" "They have weapon types we have never seen before. Kinetic accelerators that fire solid projectiles at incredible speeds. Some kind of plasma cannon that creates temporary stars. And their missiles. Admiral, each missile appears to carry multiple warheads." Zethkar studied the tactical data. The humans had not just built bigger ships. They had developed entirely different approaches to space warfare. While the Council had focused on elegant energy weapons and sophisticated shields, the humans had created crude but devastatingly effective weapon systems. "Sir," the communications officer said, "one of the human boarding craft is requesting permission to dock with the Crystal Dawn." Zethkar nodded slowly. There was no point in refusing. "Grant permission. Lower shields and open docking bay 7. As the human craft approached, Zethkar thought about what this meant for the galaxy. The Council had maintained peace and order for over 1,000 years, based on the assumption that they possessed superior military technology. Now they had encountered a species that treated warfare completely differently. The humans built ships like mobile battle stations. They deployed fleets that could probably conquer entire star systems. And they had done all of this while remaining hidden from the galactic community. "Admiral," Captain Chen's voice came through the communications, "my boarding officer will meet with you shortly to discuss terms. I want you to understand that this incident could have been avoided if you had simply respected our legal claim to this system." "Captain Chen," Zethkar replied, "what are your intentions toward my crews?" "Your crews will be treated according to the Galactic Conventions on Warfare. They will be held until this matter is resolved diplomatically. I have no interest in starting a war with the Council. No interest in starting a war. But she had just demonstrated that humanity could probably win such a war." The implications were staggering. The docking bay doors opened and the human boarding craft settled into the Crystal Dawn. In a few minutes, Zethkar would meet his first human face-to-face. He wondered what kind of beings could build such devastating war machines and then show mercy to their defeated enemies. The docking bay of the Crystal Dawn filled with the hiss of equalizing atmosphere, as the human boarding craft settled onto the deck. Admiral Zethkar waited in the corridor outside, flanked by his security chief and 2 guards. Their weapons were powered down as ordered, but he felt exposed without them. The airlock cycled open and the first human stepped through. She was smaller than Zethkar had expected. Most species that built such massive weapons were physically imposing, but the human woman who emerged from the craft was barely 2 meters tall, with short dark hair and clothing that looked more like a uniform than armor. "Admiral Zethkar?" she asked, her voice calm and professional. "Yes. I am Commander Lisa Martinez, boarding officer for the UHSV Prometheus. Captain Chen sends her regards and her hope that we can resolve the situation peacefully." Behind Commander Martinez, 4 more humans emerged from their craft. They wore different uniforms and carried equipment that Zethkar did not recognize. One appeared to be a medical officer, judging by the symbols on her clothing. "Commander," Zethkar said carefully, "I must protest the treatment of my fleet. We were conducting standard council operations in council space." Commander Martinez consulted a small device. "Admiral, our records indicate that this system has been unclaimed for over 300 years. The last council presence was a mining operation that was abandoned after the resources were exhausted. That does not matter. Once claimed by the council, a system remains council territory until officially released." "I see." Martinez made notes on her device. "That is a matter for our respective governments to discuss. In the meantime, I need to inspect your ships to ensure they pose no threat to our operations." Zethkar felt a flash of anger. "My ships pose no threat? Commander, you have just attacked a council defense fleet." "Admiral, your ships opened fire on a United Human Space Navy vessel. We responded in self-defense." Under the circumstances, Captain Chen showed remarkable restraint. The human commander's tone remained perfectly calm. She spoke as if crippling an entire council fleet was a routine matter. The casual confidence was more unsettling than threats would have been. "How long do you intend to hold us?" Zethkar asked. "Until we receive instructions from Earth Command. I estimate 48 hours for communications to reach our government and return with orders." 48 hours. That meant the humans had faster-than-light communication systems. Most species required weeks or months to communicate across interstellar distances. "Commander," Zethkar said, "may I ask how many ships the human fleet has in this system?" Martinez smiled slightly. "Admiral, you are asking me to reveal classified military information to a potential enemy. I'm sure you understand why I cannot answer that question." But as they walked through the corridors of the Crystal Dawn, Zethkar could see human technicians working at various stations. They were studying council technology with obvious interest, taking readings and making detailed recordings. "What are your people doing?" he asked. "Standard inspection procedures. We need to understand your weapons and defensive systems to ensure the safety of our personnel." They were learning. The humans were using this encounter to gather intelligence on council military technology. In a few hours, they would know more about council ships than most council officers. "Admiral," Commander Martinez said, "Captain Chen would like to speak with you directly. Would you be willing to communicate with her?" Zethkar nodded. Perhaps he could learn something about human intentions. They entered the Crystal Dawn's communications center, where Martinez activated a direct link to the Prometheus. The main screen filled with the image of a human woman in a naval uniform. She appeared to be middle-aged with graying hair and intelligent eyes. "Admiral Zethkar," Captain Chen said, "I apologize for the circumstances of our meeting. Captain Chen, I must ask what your government intends to do with my fleet. That depends entirely on how the Council responds to this incident. We had no knowledge of your claim to this system. Our charts showed it as unclaimed space available for salvage operations. The Council has maintained accurate charts for over 1,000 years. How is it possible that your charts are different?" Captain Chen paused for a moment. "Admiral, humanity has been exploring this region of space for over 200 years. We have detailed records of all systems within 50 light-years of our borders. This system has never shown any signs of recent occupation. 200 years. The humans had been exploring Council space for 2 centuries without the Council's knowledge. How had an entire civilization remained hidden for so long?" "Captain," Zethkar said, "how many human worlds are there?" "I am not authorized to discuss details of human territory with foreign military officers, but I can tell you that humanity controls a significant volume of space in this region." "Significant volume," Zethkar tried to process this information. The humans were not some minor colony or trading federation. They were a major power that had been operating in secret. Admiral, Captain Chen continued, I want you to understand that this incident could have been avoided with proper diplomatic contact. Humanity has no desire for conflict with the Galactic Council. We simply want to be left alone to develop our own territory. Captain, the Council maintains order throughout this region of space. We cannot simply ignore the presence of an unknown military power, and we cannot ignore threats to our legitimate operations. Admiral, your fleet opened fire on a human vessel engaged in legal salvage work. From our perspective, the Council committed the first act of aggression. Zethkar realized that both sides could claim to be the injured party. The humans believed they were defending their legal rights. The Council believed they were enforcing legitimate territorial claims. What do you propose? He asked. Immediate diplomatic contact between our governments. We need to establish clear boundaries and protocols to prevent future incidents. In the meantime, my fleet will complete its salvage operations and withdraw from this system. And my ships will be released once we receive guarantees that the Council will not interfere with our withdrawal. Captain Chen's image leaned forward slightly. Admiral, I want you to understand something important. The UHSV Prometheus is not the largest or most powerful ship in the human fleet. If the Council chooses to escalate this conflict, the results will be catastrophic for both our civilizations. Not the largest ship. Zethkar felt a chill. If there were human vessels even larger and more heavily armed than the Prometheus, how many ships does humanity possess? He asked. Captain Chen smiled grimly. Enough, Admiral. More than enough. The communication ended, leaving Zethkar alone with Commander Martinez and his own racing thoughts. The humans had revealed enough to make their point clear. They possessed a fleet capable of challenging the Council's military supremacy. Commander, Zethkar said quietly, what is humanity's position in the galaxy? How many star systems do you control? Admiral, that information is classified. But I can tell you that Earth is not our only world. Humanity has been expanding steadily for over 2 centuries. 2 centuries of expansion meant dozens of worlds, possibly hundreds. Industrial capacity to build ships like the Prometheus. Military doctrine that favored overwhelming firepower over elegant technology. Admiral, Martinez continued, Captain Chen asked me to give you a message. She wants you to understand that this encounter will be reported to both our governments. How they respond will determine whether our species become allies or enemies. Zethkar nodded slowly. The choice was no longer his to make. The Council would have to decide whether to acknowledge humanity as an equal power or attempt to suppress this new threat while they still might have numerical superiority. But looking at the efficiency of the human boarding party, the casual competence of their officers, and the devastating effectiveness of their weapons, Zethkar suspected that numerical superiority might not be enough. The humans had built a military machine designed for total war. They had remained hidden while studying galactic politics and technology. And they had demonstrated that they could cripple a Council fleet without breaking a sweat. The galaxy was about to change, and Zethkar was not sure the Council was ready for what was coming. 47 hours after the battle, Admiral Zethkar stood on the observation deck of the Crystal Dawn and watched the human fleet prepare to depart. The massive Prometheus dominated the view, its hull now clearly visible without the concealment of the asteroid field. Commander Martinez had been correct about one thing. The human ship was not trying to hide its nature anymore. Every surface bristled with weapons. Missile tubes, energy cannons, point defense arrays, and systems that Zethkar could not identify covered the vessel from bow to stern. Admiral, his communications officer reported. Message from Captain Chen. Put her through. Captain Chen's image appeared on the observation deck's display screen. Behind her, Zethkar could see the bridge of the Prometheus. It was larger than the entire command section of most Council ships. Admiral Zethkar, she said, we have received authorization from Earth Command to release your fleet. Your ships are free to depart. What about the territorial dispute? That matter has been referred to our respective diplomatic services. I am told that formal contact will be established within the next few days. Zethkar nodded. Captain, before we part, I must ask you something. How long has humanity been preparing for contact with the galactic community? Captain Chen was quiet for a moment. Admiral, we have known about the Council for over a century. We have been monitoring your communications, studying your technology and preparing for eventual contact. A century. The humans had been watching and learning while remaining completely hidden. They had used that time to build a fleet capable of challenging the Council's supremacy. Why did you wait so long to make contact? Sethkar asked. Because we wanted to be ready. History has shown that first contact between civilizations is often violent. We needed to ensure that humanity could defend itself if diplomacy failed. The admission was startling in its honesty. Most species approached first contact with hope and curiosity. The humans had approached it as a military problem to be solved. Captain, what are humanity's intentions toward the galaxy? We want to be left alone to develop our own territory in peace. But we will defend ourselves if threatened. I hope the Council understands that. The communication ended and Sethkar watched as the human fleet began to move. The 4 massive warships formed a defensive formation around the smaller vessels. Even in withdrawal, they maintained perfect tactical discipline. Sir, his tactical officer said, final sensor readings on the human fleet. Sethkar looked at the data and felt his confidence in Council supremacy crumble completely. The 4 large ships each carried more firepower than the entire Council home fleet. The 30 smaller vessels were each equivalent to a Council battlecruiser. But it was the technical analysis that truly shocked him. The human ships used materials and construction techniques that were centuries ahead of Council technology. Their weapons were crude but devastating. Their shields could apparently absorb direct hits from Council particle beams without even flickering. Admiral, the sensor officer added quietly, there is something else. I detected quantum signatures suggesting that each of the large human ships carry smaller vessels in internal hangar bays. Possibly hundreds of them. Hundreds of fighters or bombers inside each ship. The Prometheus alone could probably launch a larger fighter wing than most Council defense fleets possessed. Sir, his communications officer reported, the human fleet is moving to the edge of the system. They are preparing to jump to hyperspace. Sethkar activated the general communications system. This is Admiral Sethkar to Captain Chen. Safe travels, Captain. Thank you, Admiral. I hope our next meeting will be under more pleasant circumstances. The human ships reached the edge of the system and disappeared into hyperspace. Their departure was as perfectly coordinated as everything else they had done. One moment the massive fleet was there, and the next moment the system was empty except for the crippled Council ships. Admiral, his engineering officer reported. Damage assessment is complete. 3 ships require major repairs before they can travel. The rest can make it home but will need extensive work. Sethkar nodded. The human weapons had been precisely targeted to disable rather than destroy. If Captain Chen had wanted to kill them all, she could have done so easily. Set course for Council space, he ordered. Best possible speed. The journey home took 12 days. 12 days for Sethkar to write his report and prepare for the questions that would come. 12 days to think about what this encounter meant for the galaxy. The Council had maintained peace and order for over 1,000 years, based on superior technology and overwhelming military force. Now they had encountered a species that challenged both assumptions. When the battered Council fleet finally reached the home system, Sethkar was summoned immediately to the Council chambers. The Great Hall was filled with representatives from over 200 species. All of them had heard preliminary reports about the human encounter. Admiral Sethkar, the Council speaker said, present your full report. Sethkar activated the holographic display system and began his presentation. He showed sensor readings from the human ships, tactical analysis of their weapons, and recordings of his conversations with Captain Chen. The Council chamber fell silent as the data was presented. When Sethkar finished, there was a long pause. Admiral, the speaker finally said, what is your assessment of the human military threat? Honorable Speaker, humanity possesses the most advanced military force I have ever encountered. Their industrial capacity, their tactical doctrine, and their technological capabilities suggest a civilization that has devoted enormous resources to military preparation. How do their forces compare to our own? Sethkar looked around the chamber. Representatives from hundreds of worlds waited for his answer. The future of galactic politics might depend on what he said next. Honorable Speaker, based on my observations, I believe humanity could defeat any single Council member world in direct military conflict. If they possess fleets similar to what I encountered, they might be able to challenge the combined Council forces. The chamber erupted in shocked discussion. The idea that a single unknown species could threaten the entire council was almost unthinkable. "Admiral," another council member called out, "what are your recommendations?" "Immediate diplomatic contact. We must establish formal relations with humanity before this situation escalates, and we must accept that the balance of power in this region of space has changed permanently." The debate continued for hours. Some council members wanted to mobilize the full military might of the galaxy and crush the human threat before it could grow stronger. Others argued for immediate diplomacy and recognition of human territorial claims. Finally, the council speaker called for order. "The council will recess to consider this matter. Admiral Zethkar, your report will be studied carefully. We thank you for your service." As Zethkar left the chamber, he thought about Captain Chen's final words. She had hoped their next meeting would be under more pleasant circumstances. For the sake of galactic peace, he hoped she was right, but he also knew that the galaxy had changed forever. The age of unchallenged council dominance was over. Humanity had announced its presence with overwhelming force and quiet competence. The council now faced a choice that would determine the future of galactic civilization. They could accept humanity as an equal partner and work toward peaceful coexistence, or they could attempt to maintain their dominance through military force. Zethkar had seen the human fleet in action. He knew which choice offered the better chance for survival. 3 days later, the council announced the establishment of a diplomatic mission to make formal contact with humanity. The message was brief and carefully worded, but its meaning was clear. The galaxy had a new major power, and the Galactic Council was ready to acknowledge that fact.